Okay, guys, we're gonna start moving away from the Industrial Revolution. We have to take a look, for example, at some of its consequences, and we've hinted at some, and some of the interferences that why Europe didn't develop, and we've hinted at some of those. Big one, Napoleon, revolutions. Um, some things, and you're gonna have to fill in with your texts. Come on, guys, we can't cover it all in talking, especially if you're just watching. It's very difficult, I know. Would be better in class. You mean, yeah, we could have some fun. But anyway, here you go. I mean, certainly the labor conditions led to the beginnings of labor movements. Now, for years, actually about a century, labor movements were viewed as restraint of competition, restraint of trade, and they were banned and illegal and resisted by governments and owners. But they did have some successes and caused some reforms. And there were some reformer movements began, especially around child labor. But by 1833, England had outlawed slavery, and before that, they had made child labor laws regarding the health and sanitation and the hours, limiting the hours children could work. Still a lot of them, a lot of hours, but still limiting. At least there was no limits before that. Um, there became a sharp division in developing in the gender division of labor. In the mines, in the factories, women did the same work as men. In the mines, in particular, if you read your textbook, this is something I learned, wouldn't have thought of. It's so hot underground, especially if you really get down there. It's so hot that a lot of the men work naked and the women work topless. Now, that of course raised all kinds of eyebrows about licentious behavior and whatnot, but there was some. I mean, there was a spike in illegitimate births, unmarried women having children. That lasted until about 1850, by the way, because kids being away for the first time, unsupervised parental, but most of the women were in the mines were working down there with relatives, and even male relatives who certainly would look out for them. On the other hand, the conditions were still rotten. And there was a burgeoning middle class, and the women in the middle class had largely dropped out of the working in the mines and spent more attention on the family. And an ethic developed, a social ethic, a social norm, that is the appropriate role. And this appropriate role led to this idea of separate spheres of work for the men and the women. And since the women in the mines and in the factories were coming home to the second shift anyway, and if you don't know what the second shift is, it still happens today. It's very typical for men and women to both go to work, men to come home, plop down, women still do the cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids till bedtime. Very typical. That's called the second shift. Well, I think about the second shift in merry old England in 1820. You had to haul your water in from outside. If you lived in a tenement, that meant to the third or fourth floor. You had to empty chamber pots. Mm-hmm. You didn't always make it to the privy. You had to cook and wash. Washing took water. Washing took soap. Washing took effort. Hanging on the line. This was drudgery. It was terrible work. And that's after the factory work. Well, needless to say, that separate spheres idea grew and grew and grew right in through the 1950s. So you can see some developments. Also developing were some idealistic things. Conservatism raised its head again. Romanticism and nationalism began to develop. Countries, I alluded to this. The sovereign for Germany foreshadowed the development in the mid-19th century, around 1866. The consolidation, the unification of Germany as a country more like we know it today. So we have to kind of move toward in that direction. And so there was a French Revolution I mentioned. That French Revolution occurred during this same period of time. We're talking that Industrial Revolution, 1780 through 1850. The French Revolution occurred in there. And the French Revolution threw out the king, which I told you, and I alluded to the king being reinstated, or at least the kingdom being reinstated. But there was an intervening force in there, an intervening individual. His name was Napoleon. Now, the French Revolution got rid of the monarch and established a directorate, and that was representation by the people. The real problem with it is it was corrupt. It wasn't effective. It didn't manage well, and it was broke. And the people wanted goods and services from their government, and they wanted stability. They weren't getting it. Also, France continued wars with others, like the Prussians and Egypt, to maintain its influence. And a little general rose to power during that period of time, and that was Napoleon. And as he rose to power, he also rose in popularity, which gave him his power, because he was successful in battle. And he protected France and the Directorate. But he could see the opportunity. There was a power vacuum developing. The Directorate was losing the support of the people, so he staged a coup d'etat. I think it was around 1799, 1798, and took over and established the consulate, of which he was the first consul. Shortly after, shortly, give or take a few years, he called himself Emperor of France. And so much for the libertarian freedom, representative of the people, representative government. And he turned toward conservative monarchy, single rule, and he became the emperor. Now, along with becoming the emperor, he raised the largest army ever seen on Earth and promptly conquered most of Europe. And when he did that, Europe got thoroughly afraid. They also marked the old days, one of the old days, and they wanted French power curtailed. And the way to do that, I'm doing this now. There we go. I think it's worthwhile to put up where'd it go? Map. Here we are. Here's the best one. Used it before. Whoa. Somebody did something bad to me here. I am so sorry. There we go. All right. Oh, not all right. This gives you the extent of Napoleon's, oh, screen two. This gives you the extent of Napoleon's conquests, how far he extended. He had all of Italy. Spain was stayed independent. It doesn't show Africa. He took all of the Prussian areas. Yeah, by 1805. So he was considered a threat. So he controlled most of Europe by 1810. He deposed the Spanish king and installed his brother Joseph on the Spanish crown. That's what you saw with the hatch marks. He was in charge. He attempted to block all trade with Great Britain. He assumed the crown of Italy. Just to name a few, he was emperor of Egypt. However, there were some positive things with this conquering. He developed something called the Napoleonic Code, which secured wealth and property from arbitrary seizure. An absolute monarch could just take it, and did. Didn't like you, he stripped you of your land, threw you in jail. And this did happen. You're going to laugh. I hope you laugh. Hope you're thinking of something. He would take your grandmother and throw her in jail with you. The absolute kings did this. Your whole family in jail with you, even your kids. That was stopped. Now, he established the equality of all men before the law, an early concept of the rule of law, which means, translated, no one's above the law. His antics led to a new German confederation. In other words, that included Austria and Prussia, which brought Germany into consolidation. This is remember, by 1810 or so. Now, he controlled it, but what it did was follow up on that sovereign, and wow, they're now united. So when Napoleon's gone, they stayed united. He made a deal with Pope Pius VII, the Concordiant. The right of French Catholics to practice freely, but the government would pay priests and appoint bishops. Again, weakening the church and the influence of the church, putting in the hands of government. Administrative changes that foreshadow, to some extent, what was needed by modern society, and much of it remains. Now, he recalled formally, he was smart enough to say, look, the directorate, the French Revolution drove the aristocrats out of there. People were getting their head cut off left and right. Marie Antoinette, right? Louis the 15th, yep. 14th, did I see? You said 15th. 14th, head cut off. So he recalled the exiled royalty and elites because they had the skills, education, background, and experience to ably fill administrative posts. And so his government ran fairly well, brought back approximately 100,000 people. Now, on the negative side, the state of women was cemented as inferior. Free speech and press were curtailed. He took many political prisoners. Anybody who disagreed with him was an enemy. Have we heard that? Never mind. Aimed at creating, he really believed he could create a family dynasty. Look, he put his brother on the throne. And there's a little known concept, idea, piece of history you might not remember. You might have heard it, you might not remember. He put another brother on the throne, Maximilian, not a brother, Maximilian on the throne in Mexico. He also sent another brother to be the leader, viceroy, whatever you'd call it, of Haiti, but he sent him with an army of 20,000 to put down a revolt, but he lost. However, the Great Britain's blockade was stronger than the French, more effective, and the early rise to dominance of the French fleet was ended in 1805 by Lord Nelson at Trafalgar. Trafalgar is at the entry to the Mediterranean Sea, which weakened France's sea power, but it still had the biggest army ever assembled. It's also the time when everyone started to gather against the French of the idea of French nationalism. The French colonies, French nationalism in France, and the colonies against French nationalism. The successful revolt in Haiti, for example, nationalistic ideas. We are independent. We are us. You are France. Goodbye. The quadruple alliance of Russia, Prussia, the big dog in what's now Germany, Austria and Great Britain joined to defeat Napoleon. They crushed him at Waterloo in 1815. But then you had the Spanish Revolution. I told you about the Haitian Revolution, the Belgian Revolution from the Netherlands, and the breakup of the early European empire under Napoleon. But then the issue was, what do we do? Well, folks, in 1815, they called the Congress of Vienna. The participants, Great Britain, Spain, Prussia, Austria, Portugal, Russia, Sweden, and yeah, France. But France wasn't, it's the new France. It's after the defeat of Napoleon. It was called for based on treaties that ended the Napoleon reign. The Treaty of Chaumont that set alliances of Russia, Prussia, Austria, also joined by Sweden, Portugal, and Spain. As you see, Europe's ganging up on France. Representatives, I don't think you need a list of those. Two famous names, King Louis VIII, Duke of Wellington, Austria's, von Mitterrand, and Tsar Alexander. But the key was 4 of them: Wellington, Alexander, Mitterrand, and a guy named Van Harden from Prussia got together, and they were going to decide everything before everyone else got there. Talleyrand, his name will come up again, famously protested, said it violated the treaties, and it forced a postponement of anything. When they finally did get together, got down to business, the four guys I mentioned, the four countries I mentioned, just continued to scheme and try to control things. They did form several committees, and they made some accomplishments. Number one, they settled all the boundaries of the states north of the Alps. Now, there was an earlier settlement in history that's now gone. We're now settling the boundaries north of the Alps. Now, remember, this is around 1815. It's not that long ago in real history. They planned the settlement of Italy's boundaries. Italy wasn't even established as a country yet. They settled the territories of Europe for the next 40 years. In other words, they successfully set those boundaries, and they lasted for 40 years. And they established the principle of a balance of power by trading some territory and creating kingdoms that they agreed to respect, such as the Kingdom of Netherlands that included Belgium. Now that Russia gained parts of Poland, yet it gave territories on its southern border to Austria. Denmark lost Norway and many others. Above all, and this is the conservatism, they maintained the monarchies in every one of them. And that was their key purpose. That was their key purpose. Oh my. I repeat myself. There we go. So, one of us, their key idea, the key idea that was to control the defeated French. And how do we keep the peace between the countries of Europe so that we keep, Great Britain's out there. Remember the Industrial Revolution? They haven't forgotten it. They can see it. Gobbling up colony after colony, territory after territory, getting richer and richer with this industrialization, and we're fighting amongst ourselves all the time. They understood that principle. How do we keep the peace and get going? They needed to reclaim lands from the French without further dispute. So things like the Rhineland went back to Germany. They need for more organized and less aggressive isolationist and political policies. They focused on a balance of power. This is where that whole concept of a balance of power comes from. And you hear that again when we get to the 20th century and we're talking about Russia and the United States. A balance of power. And then they restored King Louis VIII as King of France. Once again, monarchy restored. Now King Louis IV, fifth, sixth. I just drew a blank. Who was the other King Louis? And anyway, his head's gone. He's not coming back. Now, so conservatism was reestablish solid monarchies. Stop the revolutions that were fostered by the Enlightenment. They were bad, destabilizing. People need a strong government to survive and thrive. Look what happened to the chaos in France when the French Revolution was over. They reestablished religion and aristocracy, bulwarks against such chaos, against the infighting. You have to have this strong government and this whole idea of divine right, that kings rule because God told them to. God's on their side. In September of 1815, the Holy Alliance was formed with Austria, Prussia, and Russia. The sole goal of that was to protect monarchy. They adopted a preemptive strike policy. In 1820s, invaded Italy and Spain to suppress constitutional monarchy that had tolerated a free press and universal male suffrage. In other words, all men could vote. Whoa, can't have that. And they restored the autocratic rule of the kings. They viewed the constitutionalism as a liberal ideology rising. Now, liberalism, to most folks, had a self-determination component. Nationalism was the right of any group to establish an independent state and insist on its own rights, usually liberal. You should read, I won't comment on them. You should pay attention to the Carlsbad decrees in 1819. But by this time, the South American revolutions had begun. Now, where were they all about? Getting independence from Spain, ending their colonial relationship. Most Spanish, Simon Bolivar, for example, in Colombia, and San Martin, throughout the Spanish, caudillos or warlords divided the territory, unfortunately, and more chaos ensued. Exactly what the kings had said and Europe had said we have to put a stop to. Caudillos, C-A-U-D-I-L-L-O-S. And they ruled by patronage, force, and popular local politics in small areas. Great Britain had already established a constitutional monarchy and a growing middle class, and the upper class was fueled by the Industrial Revolution and the laissez-faire economic policies authored by and followed by capitalism and introduced by Adam Smith and followed by capitalism. Liberalism became associated with upper-class business interests. Leave my business alone. It's mine. I want to do what I want to do. Labor unions, and I alluded to the development of them at the beginning of this, were outlawed. They were blocked to free trade. They blocked the individual's right to work. And I'll foreshadow, in 1905, the U.S. Supreme Court found exactly that. A labor law that labeled the hours and working conditions of Baker in Lochner versus New York was found by the state of New York, was found to be unconstitutional because it interfered with the constitutional right of freedom of contract. That is, the individual to contract his labor with anyone he wants. Now, just think about that. No union. Hi, Mr. Gallo. I know you're paying $18 an hour for your warehouse workers, but I want 20. Just think about where you get. Exit stage right? They'd X you out the door very fast. You don't get the job. Okay, radical Republicans said liberalism doesn't go far enough. We want universal suffrage, redistribute wealth, and government control the economy for all folks. Okay. Now, the nationalist vision, is simply that folks united by a common language, history, and culture deserved a common territory. We have that still today as a problem. The Kurdish have been looking for a place to live. They're spread out across Turkey, Kazakhstan, Iraq and Syria. And they've been looking for a place to live and been persecuted for thinking that way for a long time. So this was viewed by the conservatives as divisive and things that would destroy the borders, which the liberals said were obsolete borders of empires. And the other thing that was really happened is that all these kingdoms, especially when they divided them somewhat arbitrarily, had in them multicultural folks covering vast territories. So guess what? The nationalists generally shared liberalism or republicanism, a belief that folks could do right and live in peace and prosperity and creativity. But there arose a them versus us mentality. National mission and national superiority violate the increased is volatile. The increased global communication interaction led to conflict. Powerful nations, patriotic fervor, competing, the need to keep colonies. Remember, the colonies were exploited. They were extraction economies. Okay. So two other ideas began to form. Socialism. That was Karl Marx. There's some famous quotes by Marx about after he looked at the British factory system in 1844. He criticized it extremely. It was demoralizing. It was criminal, in his words. Crimes against man. Capitalism exploits, and a successful society requires cooperation and community. We must challenge class structure, which was becoming much more pronounced, especially in Europe, where the aristocracy was reestablished. And we have to redistribute the wealth so that all benefit. Private property must be regulated by the government. Now, Romanticism is another one, and this captured the literary and art world by storm. It championed the emotional exuberance, spontaneity, and repudiated reason. Do it because it feels good. Do it because you want to. Do it because it's your freedom. This led to movements in religious ecstasy. In the 1830s, there was a great revival called the Great Awakening. People were listening out in the fields by the hundreds, by the thousands, listening to preachers. Nature is sovereignty, and industry is the enemy of nature. Life and happiness doesn't come from reason of the Enlightenment. It comes from your emotions. It comes from what you want to do. Freedom of thought and emotion is political liberty. And the universe is not mechanical or static per science, especially Enlightenment science, social science. It equated conservatism with repression and not protecting liberties. So there you are. You have socialism, nationalism, conservatism, and romanticism all forming pretty much as an outgrowth of all the things that were really keeping Europe from advancing in the Industrial Revolution. They're about to join it. But the British government at this point, 1876, forms the Royal Commission on Noxious Vapors to look into the growing problem of industrial air pollution. Its report 2 years later would bring regulation for better air in England. All right. The folks pushing the sovereign led to attempts to draft a constitution and establish a parliament. This was offered to Crown Prince Frederick William, but he refused. Okay. So that's about 30 minutes. You get the idea of the developments in Europe and the massive changes that have occurred. Pardon me. There were a couple others. Whoops. Yeah, there were a couple others that are worth mentioning. Yeah, I did. Okay. The Nicholas of Russia suppressed any dissent, established 3 sections: the secret police of the secret police, and the monarchy was weakening and unpopular by 1825. In 1821, Greek peasants attacked every Turk they could find. Turks retaliating by hanging a church leader and sacking Greek churches in mass killings. This is in the Balkan Greeks within the Ottoman Empire. Now, what you can see happening now is this nationalism is starting to creep at the underpinnings of empires. Greece rebelled against the Ottoman Empire in 1829 for independence. Europe was kind of splitting into the liberal West and the conservative East and South. A significant rise in Russia's growing influence and control. To avoid war, the alliance allowed Belgium to become independent on the condition Belgium remain neutral. And between 1830 and 1831, 10,000 Poles emigrated to get out from under Russian rule. That gives you the ideas that are occurring. All right. There's a little bit more. I'll comment on them. We've gone fast enough. We do have the Irish famine about to occur, among other things. We'll take those things up next. Oh, what did I just do? No. I wanted to say goodbye. You don't have to listen to me anymore. I'm done.